Today is July 11th. 31 years ago today, Bosnian Serb forces began the systematic execution of at least 8,372 Bosniak men and boys in Srebrenica. The remains of more than 1,000 of those victims have still not been identified. In the Caribbean, Cuba's national power grid has now collapsed twice in under a week, as 11 million people face the worst economic crisis the island has seen since the Soviet Union fell, a crisis that traces directly to decisions made in Washington. And the World Cup semifinal bracket is set. France against Spain on Tuesday. England against Argentina on Wednesday, in the first tournament in history where the top 4 FIFA-ranked teams going in all made the Final Four. 3 very different stories. Let's take all 3. Because the draw is genuinely extraordinary and both matches yesterday deserve their own accounting before we talk about what comes next. England beat Norway 2-1 after extra time at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens on Saturday. It was, in Thomas Tuchel's manager's reading, a battle. Norway scored first. Andreas Schjelderup, midway through the first half, hit a cross shot from a difficult angle on the left that sailed over Jordan Pickford's head and in off the post. The English goalkeeper had little chance, but the manner of the goal and the way Norway had immediately put England under pressure after conceding, with Haaland leading the press, shifted the atmosphere in the arena. Then Jude Bellingham equalized just before halftime, charged into the penalty area after Anthony Gordon found him in the middle, and slotted the ball past Urian Nyland with a cool left-footed finish. Tuchel made changes at halftime, bringing on Arsenal duo Bukayo Saka and Eberechi Eze, and England steadied. The second half produced genuine jeopardy. Norway's Torbjørn Hegem thought he had restored the Norwegian lead, but VAR intervened, ruling the goal out for a push by Erling Haaland on England's Elliot Anderson that preceded the move. The television cameras caught Haaland's reaction: disbelief, frustration, and then the resignation of a player who knows what VAR is and knows it cannot be argued out of a decision. The second half ended goalless, and Jude Bellingham scored again, his second of the match, and another in his rapidly expanding list of big-game contributions at this tournament. England won 2-1. Norway and Erling Haaland are out. Haaland finishes the 2026 World Cup with 7 goals. Mbappe leads with 8. Messi has 8 with 1 assist to Mbappe's 3. And with both Mbappe and Messi still in the tournament, and Kane still playing, and Bellingham now at 4 goals with momentum, the Golden Boot race has several more chapters to write. Argentina's match against Switzerland and Kansas City was, by multiple accounts, the match of the quarter-final round. Alexis McAllister headed Argentina in front from a Messi corner in the 9th minute. Switzerland, making their first World Cup quarter-final since 1954, equalized through Dan Doy in the 67th minute, momentarily stunning the Argentine fans in Arrowhead Stadium. Then, Breel Embolo received a second yellow card for diving, reducing Switzerland to 10 men. The game went to extra time, still level at 1 goal each. And then, in the 112th minute, Julián Álvarez produced what multiple outlets are calling a candidate for goal of the tournament, a curling strike from outside the penalty area that bent past Gregor Kobel at the far post. CNN described it as one of the goals of the 2026 World Cup. ESPN's in-match assessment called it a thunderbolt. With Switzerland down a man and exhausted, Lautaro Martinez added a third in stoppage time of extra time, tapping in a rebound to make it 3-1. Argentina are through. One specific detail from Argentina's night is worth naming, because it marks the end of a specific record. Lionel Messi had scored in 9 consecutive World Cup matches, a streak stretching back through multiple tournaments. He didn't score. He assisted the first goal, and he was present throughout, but the streak ended on Saturday night in Kansas City. He is still in the tournament, still potentially hunting his Golden Boot position, still potentially heading for the World Cup final in New Jersey on July 19th. But 9 consecutive scoring appearances, a run that no footballer in history had ever achieved, is over. The semifinals deserve a closer look, because the draw has produced something that hasn't happened before. according to multiple reports in Yahoo Sports bracket coverage. This is the first World Cup in history where the top 4 teams in the FIFA World Rankings entering the tournament have all reached the semifinals. France is ranked number 1, Argentina number 2, Spain number 3, England number 4. The ranking system is imperfect, as Yahoo Sports noted. They're a very imperfect metric, but the alignment of the football world's assessment of these 4 teams with their actual tournament performance is striking, because one of the most common criticisms of the FIFA rankings is that they don't reflect tournament quality. In 2026, they did. France versus Spain on Tuesday at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, is, between the 2 remaining European heavyweights, arguably the match of the entire tournament. Spain has won this World Cup. France has won this World Cup. They played each other in the 2024 European Championship semifinal, with Spain winning. They played in the 2025 Nations League semifinal, with Spain winning 5-4. Spain eliminated Belgium in a match Mikel Merino won with a substitute's goal in the 88th minute, his second consecutive match-winning substitute's goal in this tournament. France eliminated Morocco 2-0, with Mbappe's ankle the primary concern heading in. Whoever wins Tuesday goes to the final. This is the kind of match that gets replayed for decades. England versus Argentina on Wednesday in Atlanta carries its own specific weight. England and Argentina at a World Cup is not simply a football fixture. It is a recurring historical event with its own mythology, its own images, its own specific emotional architecture for both countries. The 1986 quarterfinal produced the hand of God and the goal of the century in the same match. The 1998 round of 16 produced Beckham's red card and Michael Owen's goal. The 2002 group stage produced Argentina's elimination. Each of these meetings has produced a story that lives beyond the score. Wednesday's match will produce another. It is the first time in 30 years that England and Argentina have met at this stage of a World Cup, and it is happening on American soil, in Atlanta. In a stadium that holds over 71,000 people. England have not won a World Cup since 1966. Argentina have won 3. But Argentina's route here required extra time against 2 opponents in succession, and they are a team that has had to work harder than France or Spain to reach this stage. England, for their part, have beaten Mexico and Norway in matches that required genuine character. The gulf between these teams in terms of pedigree is real. The gap in actual tournament performance to this point is smaller than the history suggests. Now Cuba, because this story is getting the coverage of a weather footnote and deserves to be understood as the crisis it actually is. Cuba's national power grid has suffered 2 total nationwide collapses in less than a week. The July 11th Anadolu Agency morning briefing confirmed the second one plainly. This is not a rolling blackout in a city or a region. This is a failure of the electrical system across an entire island nation of 11 million people, happening twice in under 7 days. The 2026 Cuban crisis, as documented in detail on Wikipedia's confirmed article on the subject, traces to a direct chain of U.S. policy decisions. In December 2025, as part of the U.S. intervention in Venezuela that led to the capture of incumbent Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, the U.S. seized oil tankers carrying Venezuelan oil destined for Cuba and declared a blockade on Venezuelan oil exports. Venezuela had been Cuba's primary oil supplier, providing the fuel that kept its aging Soviet-era power plants running. The loss of that supply, combined with the U.S. oil blockade, left Cuba without adequate fuel for electricity generation. The Trump administration's stated goal, per multiple sources, is regime change in Cuba by the end of 2026. CNBC's reporting from March 2026 documented what was already visible 5 months ago. Cuba was facing its biggest test since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Waves of airlines had cut flights. Tourism revenues, the government's primary source of hard currency, had collapsed. The administration had imposed a blockade on payment systems, including Visa and MasterCard, limiting tourism further. A Russian oil tanker that arrived in Havana, carrying 100,000 tons of crude in March, could, according to experts, cover Cuban energy demands for only 12.5 days. A single tanker, 12 days. PBS NewsHour's analysis from April put the core question plainly. It is really a question of which country, the US or Iran, has a greater pain tolerance. That framing was made in the context of Iran. It applies equally to Cuba. The US pain tolerance in this confrontation is effectively unlimited because Americans don't feel the Cuban power outages. The Cuban government's pain tolerance may be approaching its limit, but the cost of that test is not being paid by the US administration. It is being paid by 11 million Cubans who have lived through regular power cuts, food shortages, and medicine scarcity for years, and who are now experiencing total nationwide electrical collapse twice in a week. I want to say what I think about this clearly, because the political framing of Cuba as an adversary tends to function as a reason not to ask questions about the human cost of the policy directed at it. Cuba's government is authoritarian. It suppresses dissent. It has imprisoned political opponents. Those facts are real and documented, and should be named. They are also not the same question as what a total collapse of a national power grid means for the 11 million people who live there, the vast majority of whom have no mechanism to choose their government and no agency in the decisions that led to this moment. The policy goal of regime change and the human reality of 2 nationwide blackouts in a week exist in the same space. Naming only one of them is incomplete coverage. The administration has said it intends for the Cuban regime to fall by the end of 2026. Senator Lindsey Graham has said, "Cuba's next." Trump himself said in January, "I think it's just going to fall." He may be right, but what that falling looks like for the people who live there, in the meantime, in the weeks between a blackout and a government collapse, in the hospitals that lose power, in the neighborhoods without refrigeration and Caribbean summer heat, is a story that the coverage of regime change tends not to linger in. And now today's specific date, because it matters and because the news cycle rarely pauses long enough to hold it properly. July 11th, 1995, Bosnian Serb forces, led by General Ratko Mladic, overran the United Nations-declared safe area of Srebrenica in eastern Bosnia. Thousands of Bosniak Muslim civilians who had sought refuge at the UN base at Potokari were sorted there. Women and children were allowed to pass into territory controlled by Bosniak forces. Men and boys, from teenagers to the elderly, were separated and taken. Over the following days, they were systematically executed. Their bodies were buried in mass graves. Then, in the months that followed, as investigators began to find evidence of what had happened, the perpetrators returned to those mass graves, dug up the bodies, and reburied them in secondary and even tertiary sites, scattering the remains of individual victims across multiple locations to make identification harder, to obscure the scale, to make the evidence of the crime more difficult to use in the prosecutions that eventually followed. 372 men and boys were killed. That is the confirmed minimum figure from the International Commission on Missing Persons. The systematic nature of the killings, organized, documented, carried out by military and paramilitary units operating under command, led the International Court of Justice to rule in 2007 that it constituted genocide. Ratko Mladic was convicted of genocide by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in 2017, along with war crimes and crimes against humanity. He is serving a life sentence. Radovan Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb political leader, received a life sentence in 2019 on appeal. The legal accountability, such as it is, arrived. The Anadolu Agency's July 11 morning briefing noted what is still unresolved 31 years later. The remains of more than 1,000 victims have yet to be found. The reason why is the deliberate act of those secondary and tertiary reburials. When a mass grave is reopened, the remains from a single victim may be distributed across multiple sites. Identifying those remains requires matching DNA samples from families who have, in many cases, been giving those samples to the International Commission on Missing Persons for decades against bone fragments found in soil across a geography deliberately designed to confuse the work. It is a forensic process that takes years per victim, and it is ongoing. 000 unidentified victims are not a cold case statistic. They are families who have been waiting for 31 years to know whether the person who left for Srebrenica in July 1995 is confirmed among the dead or remains among the missing. In the absence of remains and a confirmed identification, the answer to the question of what happened to their father, their brother, their son, their husband, is formally unresolved. The identification process gives them a grave. It gives them a specific date and cause of death. It closes something that the absence of remains cannot close. Bosnia is now a candidate country for European Union membership. NATO expanded to include countries across former Yugoslavia. The international institutions that failed to prevent what happened in Srebrenica have been significantly restructured since 1995. None of that brings back a single person from those mass graves, and none of it answers the question that 1,000 families are still waiting for an answer to, 31 years later on this specific date. 3 stories today. On July 11th, the World Cup has delivered its best possible semifinal draw, and Wednesday's England versus Argentina is one of the most historically loaded fixtures in the sport's history. Cuba is in the middle of its worst crisis in decades, caused in significant part by a U.S. policy choice, whose costs are being absorbed entirely by people who have no say in it. And Srebrenica is 31 years old today, with more than 1,000 families still unable to bury their dead, because the perpetrators hid the evidence well enough to take 3 decades and counting to fully undo. The football is genuinely wonderful, and I mean that with no reservation. The semi-final bracket is the best it could have been. The Julián Álvarez goal from the 112th minute in Kansas City will be in highlight reels for years. Wednesday in Atlanta is going to be extraordinary. All of that is true. So is everything else.